Today, today I'll be working in my workbook called Exodus from Egypt, and this covers Exodus chapters 1 through 12. And so I just wanted to take a quick look here. Abraham to Moses, we're seeing the genealogy tree from Sarah and Abraham down through clear to Moses and Aaron, which we jump to in the book of Exodus. And we probably will come back and look at this from time to time. And so what happened in Genesis that led to the book of Exodus? At the end of Genesis, Jacob, later named Israel, had 12 sons, which later became the 12 tribes of Israel. They are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Joseph, and Benjamin. And now I have a brief idea of what has happened up to this point. Once Jacob had these 12 sons, we know in chapter 37, Joseph was Israel's favorite son, and he had dreams, and his brothers were jealous, so they sold him in chapter 37 of Genesis. And then 39, Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of his house, and his wife tries to seduce Joseph, lies about it, so Potiphar puts Joseph in prison. And then in chapter 4, this is again a preview of what happens before Exodus. Pharaoh puts his cupbearer and baker in prison. Joseph interprets their dreams, and the cupbearer was restored, but the baker was hanged. Then in chapter 41, Pharaoh has a dream and calls for Joseph to interpret it. The dream predicts a famine. Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of all Egypt. Chapter 42, Joseph's brother go to Egypt to buy grain, but don't recognize him. He keeps Simeon in prison and sends the rest to fetch Benjamin. And chapter 43, when the grain runs out, Joseph's brothers go back to Egypt with Benjamin. Joseph invited them to his house and gave them a feast. And then chapter 44, Joseph hid his cup in Benjamin's sack, then sent a steward after his brothers. Judah offers himself as a slave instead of Benjamin. In chapter 45, Joseph tells his brothers who he was. They're afraid, but he told them, God sent me here to save my family, and his brothers go to fish their father. In chapter 46, Israel sets out with all his household. God tells him not to be afraid, and Israel and all his family come to Egypt, and Joseph meets him there. In chapter 47, Pharaoh allows Joseph's family to settle in Goshen. The famine continued, and the Egyptians sold all they had to Pharaoh for food. And then lastly, in chapter 50, just before the book of Exodus, Pharaoh allows Joseph to go and bury Jacob. Before Joseph dies, he said that God will lead his people back to the promised land. So now we're going to jump to 400 years later to the book of Exodus, which is where we are now. So our first chapter will be Pharaoh oppresses the children of Israel. Okay. And we also have this timeline Exodus, which we will be working on during the book. Chapter 1, Pharaoh oppresses the children of Israel. Exodus chapters 1, verses 1 through 22. The scriptures say, now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man in his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. So we hear on the picture here, we have the two wives and the two concubines of Jacob and all their sons and whose mother they are. Who is Israel? Well, we know Israel is also known as Jacob. Israel is the name of a person and now of a people. He was named Israel, and And it will be his name, but also the name of the people that we even know today, Israelites. Circle on the diagram to the left. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. If we circle them, then we these right here. And shape fill, no fill. Okay. Who is already in Egypt? It'd be Joseph. So technically in that circle, you wouldn't have Joseph because he's already in Egypt. Who is Dan's full brother? So you've noticed here Dan's full brother would be Naphtali. Who is Judah's mother? So you're looking at for Judah. Judah is Leah. Leah is his mother. And who is Naphtali's father? Naphtali. Father? Well, Jacob. The father of all of them is Jacob. How many people in all are descendants of Jacob? And that would be 70. 70 are the descendants of Jacob coming over. So put the answer here of 70. Now deduct all the sons, and that would be 12 sons, right? And deduct Jacob, so that's 1. And then these are the children and grandchildren of Jacob, which would be 57. Great-grandchildren of Jacob. Notice all 4 mothers, Leah, Zilpah, Rachel, and Bilhah, have died before this. And then we'll actually find out the names of all these in Genesis 46, 8 through 27, but it's not in this book. And anyway, so that's how many, basically 57 great-grandchildren, great children and grandchildren that are coming with Jacob to Egypt. Quite a lot of time change that has happened. So the scriptures continue. Exodus 1:6. And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. The children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So we've gone from 70, and now we're talking about several generations, actually. Who all died? Joseph, all his brothers, of course, Jacob, and those were people that we knew died since they've been to Egypt. How do we know that there were a lot of Hebrews or children of Israel? Because they were fruitful and increased abundantly. Do we know how long this time was? Yes, or at least we can get close. And I filled in the blanks here for you. Using the scripture below, how long were the children of Israel in Egypt when it was time for them to leave? Exodus 12:40. Now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt were 430 years. We put 430 years there on the line. And then this time includes the life of Moses up to this time. Since Moses has not yet been born at the start of Exodus, and is at least 80 years of age when the children leave Egypt, subtract 80. So we have 80 to subtract and a negative. Then the result would be 350 years. And 350 years is where it is right now because Moses hasn't been born yet. So it's been 350 years since the end of Genesis. The balance is approximately the number of years that have passed before verse 6 happens. Where are all these Israelites living? In Egypt, in the land of Goshen of Egypt. Specifically, they're living in the land of Goshen. Okay, so at this point in time, it's about 350 years from the end of Genesis. The scriptures continue. Exodus 1:8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Look, The people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. So what was happening is that the Israelites were sheep herders and took care of livestock. So generally they were a more hardier bunch. The Egyptians tended not to do that. The Egyptians tended to have slaves do the hard labor. Therefore, they were not built strong and physical like the Israelites were. And so they were starting to see a problem because the Israelites were getting so big, muscular wise and amount of people wise, that they were starting to swamp the true Egyptians. So the king, and this is several, like 350 years later, the king hardly doesn't know Joseph anymore. The things that Joseph did for Egypt are not remembered. And so then the king felt free to do things to the Israelite people. Did this king or Pharaoh know Joseph? No, he didn't know him. He didn't remember him from history. Since Joseph was such a major part of the success of Egypt in his time, this new Pharaoh would have had to been several generations removed from the Pharaoh Joseph knew in order for all this to happen the way it is. What did this Pharaoh call the people descended from Jacob? The children of Israel. How did this Pharaoh describe these people? They are more and mightier than we. And they have been multiplying greatly, and they're mightier because they have jobs that require strength. Who was this Pharaoh? Let's see, we're going to use math and then use table on page 4, which we'll look at once we get this through here. So looking at page 4, what year did Jacob and his family settle in Egypt? So look at page 4. Settled in Egypt in 1876 BC, or before Christ, basically. 1876 BC. And and then the subtracted number of years figured in 3 on the prior page. So 350 years, right? So now what is the approximate year? 1526. So they settled in Egypt and about 15, oops. Oh yeah, we're going backwards to the 0 AD. So that's the reason. Okay, so 1876 is when they landed in Egypt. 350 years has it occurred since Genesis, and now so it's 1526 BC, before Christ. The years go backwards when it comes as it goes towards 0. Who was the pharaoh during this year? So with the year of 1526, looking back here, it would be the High Coast period, probably Tutmosis I, 1526, 1527, right? Most one. What was the worry of this Pharaoh regarding the children of Israel? That they are more and mightier and stronger, and we need to make sure that they don't join with our enemies and fight against us. And so it was his concern. So the scriptures continue. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. So you see on the map there, Pithom and Ramses. And you see the land of Goshen. Okay. The Israelites lived in the area of Goshen. So circle the area of Goshen. They built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. Circle Pithom and Ramses. All right, we can do that. Who did the Pharaoh set over the Israelites? Taskmasters. Basically, the Egyptians forced the Israelites into slavery to build their great cities. Now, how did they force them to slavery? I don't know. Restrict certain things the Israelites needed. They don't say how they force them into slavery, but that would be one way. Interesting facts. Although Lower Egypt is the most northern part of Egypt versus Higher Egypt, which is south, the terms lower and higher have to do with elevation, not geographical location. Goshen is a rich, fertile valley due to the branches of the Nile River flowing out north into the Mediterranean Sea. What were the Israelites doing before they became slaves to the Egyptians? See scripture below. So let's read Genesis 46, 31 to 34. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I'll go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who are in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they've brought their flocks, their herds, and all they have. So it shall be when the Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. And basically, the abomination, I would say, has to do with strong physical heavy labor versus not heavy labor. The Egyptians were more interested in having slaves do that kind of labor. So the Israelites were shepherds before they became slaves to the Egyptians. How did the Egyptians feel about shepherds? They were abomination to them. Okay. So the scriptures continue. Exodus 1:12. But the more they, the Egyptians, afflicted them, the more they, the Israelites, multiplied and grew. And they, the Egyptians, were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and brick and all manner of service in the field. And all their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. So the Egyptians afflicted more and more on the Israelites to try to control them. But what happened is the Israelites continued to multiply and grow. They were a hardy bunch. And so the Egyptians dreaded the children of Israel. And anytime a person has fear against another, a lot of times anger comes out. So a lot of times the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, hard labor. And so that was the situation that existed. What happened despite the Egyptians forcing the Israelites into labor? They multiplied and grew. Their numbers grew no matter what they did. What did the Egyptians feel about the Israelites? They were in dread of the children of Israel. The word dread means great fear or apprehension. The idea of these shepherds taking over Egypt just was very abhorrent to them. Why did the Egyptians feel this way about the Israelites again? Because they were getting more and mightier than they. There were more and more of them, and they were strong. And so the Egyptians definitely became afraid of them. So complete the sentence in 4. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. The word rigor means strictness, severity, or harshness. How did the Egyptians make the Israelite lives bitter? By making them work with hard bondage, being able to, slave labor, demanding a lot from them. What were the materials used for construction? They, let's see, made in mortar and brick and all mortar and brick. So the scripture continues. Exodus 1:15. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, what do you do when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools? If it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, save the male children alive. So the king of Egypt was already stating that the male children should die at birth, childbirth. But the daughters of the Israelites can live. The daughters probably, I don't know, were more useful, or the Egyptians then could marry into them. I don't know why they would allow the women to live, but not the men. Other than the men could rise up and be a military. Is the only way I can think of it. What were the names of the Hebrew midwives? Shiphrah and Puah. What type of child did the Pharaoh want killed at birth? The boy child. Did the midwives do as the Pharaoh commanded? No, they did not. Why didn't the midwives do what the Pharaoh commanded? Because they feared God more than the Pharaoh. Do you think that God will bless the midwives for their decision? Why and why not? Yes, I believe that he will bless them when we have to make difficult decisions and stand by God versus what we're told to do, and God will bless us. And here on the bottom is what's called a birth stool. That's how they used to give birth at that time, is they would sit on a stool where the baby then would come out through the stool rather than lie in bed. So the scriptures continue. Exodus 1:18. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to the Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. What reason did the midwives give the Pharaoh for the male children being born alive? That the Hebrew women didn't wait for them to come. They gave birth before the midwives even got there. Did God bless the midwives for their actions? Yes, he did. What do we continue to see happening with the children of Israel? They are multiplying still. What did God do for the midwives? He provided households for them, that is, families and maybe money to have a house, etc. Do you think the midwives were brave? Yes, they were brave because Pharaoh could have caused their death. Opinion question. Does God like lying? No, he doesn't. So even though we had not heard it before, do you think the midwives lied to the Pharaoh? Why or why not? I don't think they lied to the Pharaoh. Uh, they maybe stretched the truth a bit, but it was a way to explain to the Pharaoh why they were allowing the boy babies to live. So the scriptures continue. Exodus 1:22. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. And he's talking about the Israelite sons and daughters, not the Egyptian sons and daughters. What did the Pharaoh command all his people to do? Cast every son of a Hebrew woman into the Nile. Although it doesn't specify, it's only the Hebrew boys, not the Egyptian boys. Why the Hebrew baby boys and not the Hebrew baby girls? Because they can grow up to be mighty in war. The boys can. What river is the Pharaoh talking about? It's the Nile. The Nile is what is the river of life for the Egypt. What year is this? 1526, I believe. I believe we came up to that number. What pharaoh is this? Tutmosis I, I believe. Let's look again at Tutmosis I. Tutmosis I, the time Moses was born. Tutmosis I, 1527. And then, how long have the children of Israel been in Egypt? About 350 years. So now we come to the end of the chapter, and we have a crossword. How many sons did Jacob have? 12. He had 12 sons. Number 4, Jacob's other name is Israel. Number 6, the Israelites built the cities of Pithom and Ramses. One down. How many descendants of Jacob first settled in Egypt? I believe that answer is 70. Believe that answer is 70. Let me look real quick. I'm pretty sure that's what I'm looking for there. Yes, 70. Every son who is born you shall cast into the river. Yes, river. How many women did Jacob have children from? 4. The 2 midwives are Shiphrah and Puah. And that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoy it. Have a good day.